just like a good student, always open to feedback. So I want to share that. So great. Welcome. Great to have you all here. My name is Mr. Roberto Brunel. I'm from Houston, Texas, and this is my second year teaching at Belen Jesuit. And I was so excited to present at this conference about procedures, because they have just saved my life and have made just teaching an incredible joy. Really, almost like the sound of music sometimes with particularly my sixth graders. So the way I designed this presentation is I wanted to also introduce you not to just the procedures, but also, right, deeply integrated with procedure is my instructional style, right? So what I have here is basically what students see when they walk into the classroom, right? So they know to greet me at the door, right? Everyone shakes Mr. Brunel's hand before you sit down and go to your desk. You pull out your notebook, right? And you do the do now. Right? So basically the bell work or bell ringer, right? So picking up for them, it'd be just copying down the objective and the exit ticket, right? So they know what they're going to learn today, right? They know what questions I'm going to expect for them to answer by the end of my lesson. And they also see the agenda. They see what's going to happen that day. And so it makes them feel secure, makes them feel safe, right? That Mr. Brunel he's not the mystery teacher. He's going to be very clear with them on what they're learning and what he's expecting of them. So we'll go ahead and roll right into this. Dr. Wong's procedures for Harmonious classroom. So let's continue. So of course, before, like all things, we begin in prayer. So you can remain seated for this. We pray. In the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for the gift of life, the gift of peace. We ask that you open each of our hearts to your most holy will. We ask that you help us to grow in the ways you're calling us, that we may do all things for your glory. We pray together, Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward, save that of knowing I do your will. Amen. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, even with the boys, the prayer procedure. So, let's continue. My turn. So the my turn procedure. My students know that during the my turn procedure, they have their notebooks out, they're copying down notes, right? And they're silent, they're paying attention to me because I'm going to tell them something really cool and interesting. So a little bit of my story. So this is a picture of me dressed up as Saint Ignatius of Loyola when he was a knight. And I think this accurately describes my experience in my first time teaching sixth graders, right? So I was hired at Belen, but they didn't tell me what I was going to teach. I told them I was open to whatever, but really I was thinking, oh, they'll put me in high school for sure. And I realized, hey, we actually need you in sixth grade. I'm like, okay, well, how bad could it be? And it was crazy. It was absolutely insane. So it was, great. Like, oh, the sixth graders they're so funny. They're open, right? This is great. But then I realized because I didn't give them procedures and structure, they provided the procedures. I did not like their procedure. It was crazy, right? Lots of discipline issues. It was Mr. Brunel versus 10-year-olds. They really loved me, but it was just crazy, right? My Apple Watch would tell me like, they're gonna get hearing damage because it's so loud in the classroom, right? So I was just like, what is going on? Like, this is teaching. I do not want this, right? And so I reached out to a colleague of mine who's teaching here as well. And he recommended, hey, Roberto, I think what would be great for you is if you read this book by Dr. Wong, The First Days of School, right? Which many of you might be familiar with. And many people read The First Days of School, but they kind of close it up and they're like, okay, that was a great thing. But I really I sat in classrooms that were using this model of formation and education, and I was just blown aback. Like, wow, like, okay, I can be an effective teacher, right? And I just gotta learn, right? So, I had all kinds of discipline issues. I was making sixth graders cry. It was not pretty, right? And I felt bad. I was like, oh, this is not who I think I want to be as a teacher. So, anyway, I looked for hope and Dr. Wong was able to provide me that hope. So, the power of procedures, right? So, Dr. Wong finds in his research and his study of many, many classrooms, right, is that the number one problem he finds is that it's not discipline, right? It's not that the students haven't been issued, appropriate consequences or things like that, but rather it's the lack of procedures, right? The lack of clarity with what needs to be going on in that moment in the classroom, right? He says the best, excellent teachers are the ones who plan. And procedures are a way, basically, to help you you in this process, right? So an effective teacher manages the classroom, they manage it. An ineffective teacher focuses only on discipline, right? So think about the whack, I'm sure you've had the experience of the whack-a-mole, right? This kid, he like won't be quiet, right? And a lot of teachers, when they're asked about their classroom management plans, what's the response? Is typically discipline. Oh, I talked to them, or I kicked them out of the class, or it's typically like that's not a classroom management plan. That's a discipline plan, right? And so he challenges educators to really look at, okay, are you providing the environment, right? That consistent environment that's going to make them feel safe, that's going to make them feel secure, that they know what's to expect, and that it's going to help with their learning, right? And so what he finds is that these procedures, these very clearly defining every moment in the classroom, right? It actually creates order, right? And it maximizes its learning time. So the procedures, right, become this great oil in your content delivering machine, right? Because you have great things you want to share with your students, you have great things you want them to learn, right? And the procedures help you with all of that and help you to do it much more efficiently and much more effectively, because everyone's on the same page. So famously, this is one of Dr. Wong's talks. He's got different kind of lecture series. And he described the gathering attention procedure, right? He was like this, he was telling the story, this one was able to get everyone's attention just by raising her hand. The entire room goes silent, the entire auditorium. It was this large space he was describing. And by putting her hand up and counting down, everyone went silent and everyone was looking at her. And so he shares, well, that's her procedure. I just showed you mine. What's yours, right? So we can even put our personal spin on these procedures, right? But what a beautiful way to gather everyone's attention without screaming, without flickering the lights, without yelling over the microphone, right? It was peaceful, it was calm, everyone knew what they needed to do. So let's continue. Power procedures. So implementing procedures, right? So he has a fundamental 3-step process here. You explain and walk through the procedure. Sometimes the students can design the procedure themselves. They're pretty intuitive, right? So what's a good, so I need to tell them, guys, I think we need a lacrosse stick procedure. All of a sudden I started seeing all these lacrosse sticks. It's like, well, and so I just tell them, what's the lacrosse stick procedure? Like, oh, well, Mr. Brunel, I think we put it on the ground and we don't touch it. Like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's the lacrosse stick procedure, right? So you get the students involved as well with this, right? Some things have to be more clear about, right? Or the water bottle procedure, right? Because maybe you've heard, like, whenever someone has this metal water bottle and it falls to the ground, it creates this terrible sound, right? It's like, okay, guys, we need a water bottle procedure. What's the water bottle procedure? Well, you put it on the ground, so if it falls, it's not as loud, right? So we define every kind of little thing. It's like, oh, guys, we need to practice the water bottle procedure. And then they all know, oh, okay. So it's, again, it's always in reference to the procedure, right? So explain and walk through the procedure. We model it and practice it, and I just share it. And then, of course, reinforce. So don't be afraid to practice the procedure. Procedures are always practiced, right? So, an example, right? Some of my, even with my 10th graders, they come in and it was just crazy. It was chaotic. I was like, guys, we need to try the coming into the class procedure again. Because they all know, right? They're there to walk in, they're to shake my hand, they're to go to their desk, to open a notebook, start copying down the objective and the exit, right? But they needed to practice it. So I asked them to do it. So we did that once, right? And it reinforced that for them. So you can do this with all kinds of procedures if you're finding issues with the students who are having trouble in order to reinforce it. But also it's a positive thing, right? You're not saying, oh, you're doing the procedure wrong, but rather we just need to practice it, right? So that positive is I think a much more healthy kind of relationship to have with the teacher instead of the kind of like, here's the hammer, you're not doing it right. So procedures are practiced, right? So these are a few of my procedures, and I'll give you a list of some other ones, right? So they know what to do to enter the classroom, right? My gathering attention procedure, right? So they raise, I raise my hand, you raise your hand, right? And we're all silent, we're looking at Mr. Brunel, because that means he's going to give us an instruction, right? So it's great for transitions, right? As you know, transition can be difficult in the classroom. So it's great, so everyone has your attention, you give the clear thing, and then say, okay, when I say go, that's when we do this. Go, right? And then they move on to the next thing. The my turn procedure, as you know, I explained to you, is someone that Mr. Brunel is giving a direct instruction. The water bottle procedure, the break procedure, right? So they know what they can do during the break, right? We have 80-minute blocks here, so they need a break. So I would give them 5 minutes to do whatever they like, right, within reason. And with the 6th graders, I do a chant break, so we sing together. I teach theology, 6th grade and 10th grade theology. And so we do a little bit of singing for 6th grade. And of course, the very simple pencil procedure. Just go ask Mr. Brunel for a pencil. And I'm not going to question why you're not prepared for class. Here's the pencil. Just give him a pencil. Key things for the procedures. So really, these work the best when they start on day one, right? I had to implement procedures halfway through the year, and it was difficult. It was very difficult. But I was able to get the classroom to a much more functional level than before. So teaching, starting strong well on the first day of school is the best way to do this. And again, I'm not saying be strong in the strict sense, right? You just want to show to the students that you have a very structured environment, right? That you have a plan, right? You're confident in the classroom. So teaching them explicitly from the first day of school. And I'm going to show you what I do for the first week of class. I actually don't do content. I try my best not to do content. I just do onboarding, right? Why would we expect our students to be, just all right, ready to go, ready to start taking notes, right? When I haven't even told them how I'm going to assess them, how they're going to be evaluated, what am I expecting, those kinds of things, right? So I spent about 4 class days, teaching them the procedures, right? This is Mr. Brunel's class. This is how you're going to be evaluated. This is the structure and flow of his class, and I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like. Key thing is consistency, right? So the moment you start seeing things slide, right, that's when you need to kind of jump on that. Because this repetition is going to create those habits, right? Just like virtues, right? You practice the virtues, right? And so really trying to not let them slide, because I notice once you let kind of one thing slide, then another thing slides, and then you're kind of back to, then you really have to kind of be a little more kind of, okay guys, we really do have to practice this procedure. So don't be afraid to do the repetition, even if it takes a little bit of your time. If you can get it early, right, it's going to save you so much time at the end of the semester where you're just flying through content, right? It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. Rules versus procedures, right? So there are some things, right, of course, that can't be procedures, they're just rules, right? There are things that the students can't do. They can't deface the property of the desk. They can't, be allowed obscenities. They can't, So being clear about some things that are rules, right? Keeping those kind of few, right? Because again, you overwhelm a list of rules, and that's not helpful. And of course, procedures. Procedures are practice. Rules you just don't touch. And then also the appropriate follow through. And the appropriate follow through with rules is also critical, right? Because you also want your students' procedure is just. Follow through if we want to avoid any kind of situation of favoritism or perception of favoritism, which is really, really important. So rules and procedures are great. This is a very important distinction. Sometimes a procedure will become a rule for a particular student, right? So if I see a student who's coming in and say, hey, I notice you're constantly getting up and getting hand sanitizer, right? Or constantly throwing stuff away in the trash. Those things, I tell them it breaks my flow, guys. So a rule for you is you're not going to get up and get sanitizer or throw to the trash can. And then they understand what I mean by this. Finally, student buy-in, and I'm going to show you how I do this, right? So explaining to them how the procedures are going to help them, right? They're going to help them succeed. I tell them, guys, I'm using the best research out there. I'm using a formative assessment, right? I have a structured class. I post the agenda. I teach to objectives, and I have exit tickets, right? I'm using all the best things, right, in education, and that's how I'm designing my course for you. It's not just whatever Mr. Brunel wants to do with a bunch of students for 80 minutes, right? It's based on, and I teach them that. So this is an example of what my first day of school looks like, right? The agenda's posted, right? They already know immediately to begin to copy down the exit ticket, right? And I give them a little slip that I'm going to show you of the procedures, right? And so already so the next 4 days look a lot like this, right? We're talking about the importance of procedures for a great learning environment, right? They're going to start listing classroom procedures, right? So I'm already, and for many of them, it's the first time they ever have a teacher who does this, right? At least at this kind of level. At the elementary school level, this is more kind of intuitive, but they're like, whoa, okay, Mr. Brunel means business here, right? Now, he's not mean, he's not strict, right? At least in that sense, right? But he has a process here, and you got to buy in. So I tell them what's gonna, what to expect in the class, right? I even do a day on how I'm gonna evaluate them, how they're gonna earn their grade in the course. My next slide is day 3 of procedures, right? So they have to be able to list the parts of my class, right? Describe the ordering, right? Why is it ordered this way? Why is my turn typically first before your turn, right? Why do we take a break in the middle of class? Even those kinds of things, right? So there's a purpose to all of this, there's even one day where I show them the research. Like, look at these are all the factors for effective learning. One of the highest ones is what we're doing right now, teacher collaboration. Right? You get all these teachers together. Well, students become more effective learners, right? So I show them some of the research and things like that. And so I spend again 4 days, and I'm totally okay with that, right? And I will not let anyone take that away from me. Those first 4 days are critical. And so don't be afraid to not do content. because you're just gonna fly. If you're consistent with this, you're gonna fly for the rest of the year. And it's gonna be so wonderful and so beautiful, and they're gonna learn so much. So they'll get a little kind of slip of paper like this, just to show like, oh, these are all the possible procedures, right? Now, do we practice every single one? No, right? But the key thing is that, right, you're giving this impression, right, of a well-organized environment, right? On day 1, so you can avoid this on day 30. So this is my first year at the end of the year. So I was like, oh, let's take a picture. And so although there, this is, I guess, an appropriate moment to kind of go crazy. It's the end of the year, right? But yeah, no, it's nothing. I think I'm trying to think right now. I don't think I've given a single penance hall, a single detention this year to my 6th graders. And I think a lot of it has to do with the procedures. They love the procedures. And don't take my word for it. These are some of my students. They submitted some feedback for me. So right, it makes things more organized, easier to understand, straightforward. Right, they keep the classroom running smoothly. No one is screaming. Right, that's a big one. With 6th graders, they like to love to scream. Procedures keep the class organized and on task. And of course, with other procedures, we would be out of order. So it's very clear that the kids love them, right? The 10th graders aren't as excited about it, right? But they know, right? And I get more of the eye roll, like, oh, Mr. Brunel's procedure this, and they start making up their own procedures, right? But they know that it's for their good, and for the most part, I still get buy-in because it's very clear. And then whenever I do have to issue a consequence, right, it's always in reference to the procedures, right? So it's not just Mr. Brunel deciding. It's like, okay, we have a job we need to do together, and you're free to make your own decisions. I try to use that. You're free to make any decisions you want in this class, right? But for some, every decision has a consequence, positive or negative. And so really inviting them into that freedom allows them, I think, to really say, okay, no, I want to buy into this, and I'm going to follow the procedures. And if I ever do have kind of a discipline issue that comes up, typically before the next class, so because I'm greeting all the students at the door, I can in that moment say, hey, I noticed you made a negative comment to that student. Today, you're not going to make any negative comment, nor in the future you're going to make negative comments to that student. Is that clear? Yes? Okay, great. There will be a consequence. Okay. So usually you can kind of nip those things early, right? Start off well, as you know, and the rest of the class is just forming. So this is so all my classes end with the exit ticket, right? It's a form of formative assessment, right? So I typically now I do not grade them. But it's a great way for me to see if I'm effective, right? Have I been effective that day in that day's lesson? Did I set up the environment to where they could learn well? And also lets me adapt to see, okay, maybe this guy needs a little more attention, things like that. And so they all have to show me this. If they have 2 options with this. So they can either, I tell them, guys in the front, use it from all your, write it down from your memory, right? Write it down from your memory. From the back, make the corrections, or you can just bring it to me, and then we'll talk about it together. We'll make the corrections. And I do this every day. Now you think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of time of grading. It's like, well, between the, you've got some students who are already kind of strong performers, like you don't really need to check on them. Like how they're going to do because historically they've done well, right? But then this allows you to really focus on the guys who need a little more help, as well as give them more clear feedback. And you'll also notice at the top of the exit ticket, I've got 3 sort of statuses, right? There's progressing, mastery achieved, and exceeding mastery. So I try to also use that positive language as well. I try to avoid failure language. So it's just like, okay, well, you're just progressing, right? And that's fine, right? So let's figure out how you need to progress a little more. And the kids love whenever they get mastery achieved. They're like, oh, Mr. Brunel, how can I get exceeding mastery? Like, well, okay, well, show me a little more detail. Show me a little more examples, right? Then I can give you exceeding mastery. So they do appreciate the exit ticket, and then it becomes a beautiful, concrete way of what they learned that day. And also, this helps me be a better teacher, because I think sometimes teachers have the tendency to want to kind of dump all this content, right? And then later you're making the assessment, the evaluation, and you're like, okay, well, what exactly did I want them to kind of learn for sure by the end of my unit or lesson, things like that. So the exit ticket also helps me to teach, to make sure that I taught well to those things, right? So as you notice, I designed the whole lesson. Okay, hopefully by the end you'll be able to describe this great power procedures, list a few that process, and then of course I showed you some examples of my first day of school and you can begin to think about what your first day of school will look like next year. So, I'll end with just some book recommendations. So I love the three Wong books that I have on my desk, right? The First Days of School, his classroom management book, his instructional book are all excellent texts, and they've really challenged me as an educator. And another one that has had a strong influence on me is never work harder than your students, right? How do we you find that you're doing a lot of the work, right? Like let's shift that to the students, right? So she's helped me a lot with doing some mastery-based grading. So being okay with things like retakes, right? And designing my tests in such a way that where I don't have to redesign a test if I want to evaluate a student again. If the student for some reason or another, right, they bombed the test or whatever, so they weren't ready, they weren't prepared for it, I have a system in place to where they can, okay, well, I need you to master these objectives. So you can do it, right? I'm not going to penalize you for it, but you need to study and you need to be able to show the mastery with that. And so she's helped me understand things like that and how to kind of offload some of this stuff onto the students. And of course, finally, Dr. Hattie is great for some of the cognitive science behind education and learning. And he's got some great stuff. And I love his line, and I think I shared with y'all earlier that, with the previous group, but he says something along the lines of, a teacher's first job isn't to be a teacher, but rather to assess their effectiveness, right? Are we being effective teachers, right? And I think that's something that sometimes maybe we don't ask ourselves enough about. And so that's why I love the daily formative assessment with the exit ticket, because it's a great communication tool for me. It tells me if I was effective or not that day. Did I do what I was trying to do, right? Did I not? So I need to change things up, right? And it's also great for the students because it also communicates to the student very clearly that they don't know something or that they do know something, right? So that we don't have to wait till the first quiz or the first test when they bomb it. It's like, okay, well, what was going on? It's like, well, if you have a string of exit tickets, you can say, okay, well, there's been maybe a recurring theme, or we can catch it early, right? Diagnose the problems before the test comes up, right? Things like that. So, but anyway, that's all I have for you all. So thank you. Any questions that I can answer? I'm a new educator. I'm a young educator. So I'm also very open to feedback too. Some of you, I'm sure you've been teaching much longer than I have, and so I'm very open to hearing about your experiences and things like that.
Okay, so I have a few questions because I also teach a sixth grade religion.
Yes.
When it's your turn to speak and teach, are they taking notes? Are they? What does that look like?
Sure. So for my turn, is the lecture portion.
Okay.
And typically, if I want them to take down notes for sixth graders, what I'll do is I'll bold the things that they need to take down, and I typically will communicate that on the slide as well as verbally, so they at least are two places they're seeing it, and they are taking it down in a physical notebook. So I do a hybrid model in my class. So. Okay. We pull out the iPad if we need it, right? I'm not afraid to use ChatGPT or things like that. So if the students like, oh, ask ChatGPT, where in the Bible can we find so-and-so or something? Sometimes chat can be helpful for that. But again, we pull out the iPad just for that tool, and then we put it away when we don't need it. But yeah, I ask them to use physical notebook because the research is very clear on physical notebooks that helps us engage. It helps with the memory and everything. So I think really we all need to kind of move to that. But yeah, that's what's going on.
Okay. And second question. Okay, so when it's your turn, how do you deal with the, hey, so I gotta tell you what I did this weekend. How do you deal with that?
Sure. So a lot of it is going to be a lot of practicing the your turn procedure. Mm-hmm. So I remember having to early on, basically just being very clear about what I want from them. So I'm trying to think of an example of a your turn. Okay. Sometimes it's practicing, so maybe I've taught them a definition and I want them to practice it, right? Mm-hmm. So being okay also using some time in the classroom to just practice, practice memorizing with each other. And so with that, the first thing I do is be very, very super clear with them, as you know, right? So you're like, okay, gentlemen, for your turn, you're going to turn to your neighbor and you're going to practice this 3 times, and then in 5 minutes we'll come back. And so we'll just practice it. Okay, if it means moving the desks, right? Because some classrooms have a kind of movable desk thing. Practicing, doing that a few times, right? Just being very.
Please excuse the interruption. We want to thank everyone for coming to Belen today, and we want to make sure that you do go by the dining hall before leaving. We have companionship there. Plus the QR code for the evaluation form will be on the TV screens. By completing the evaluation form, you will receive a certificate for your in-service points. We thank you again. Don't forget that we also have in the gym, the vendors are there so that you can go by and visit with them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'd say the clarity and the practicing, right? And then there's like an end goal. There's an end goal with it, right? So, and then also part of it is also kind of walking around, or you ask them, hey, what's the your turn procedure, and then have them repeat back. Okay, like, can we practice it? Yeah, and then so there's a bit of that. So a lot of, again, like practicing, and then because I also want to see like, okay, are they engaged? And so the walking around helps a little bit. But asking the practice. So like, oh, I've noticed. So this is the third time I've had to ask you to practice the your turn procedure. Do you know it? And then you're like, okay, yes, okay, like, and then that's when you have to maybe elevate something to a rule. It's like, okay, well, you're free to continue getting on task, but there's going to be a consequence, and I'm doing this for your success, right? I love to use the line, I'm not going to let anything get in the way of your learning, right? So it's like, okay, if it means this, right, I'm not going to let anything get in the way. So I think, yeah, those are the few things that I do.
Mine is a comment. I really appreciate your candor and sharing how the first year experience was, because we have so many teachers that go through that, and it's really neat that you found this and the reading on the Dr. Wong books and stuff, and I'm taking a lot back with me for the teachers in the future.
Awesome.
So I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I've just heard so many horror stories where people are they're hired and they're thrown into the classroom and there's no onboarding process, there's no, maybe you get like a crash course on classroom management, but like, we can really systematize some of these things for our new teachers. And I'm in a principalship formation program right now, and so like, I want to make sure whatever school I'm leading, like, everyone is inducted into something like this, right? And my line is like, honestly, I think as teachers, like, we don't have the right to be creative until we can prove that we're effective. And so I say, start with the, what are the kind of basic principles here? Are we teaching to objectives? Are we being clear? Do we have a classroom management? Then that's when we can then that allows us to be creative, right? I think sometimes we kind of flip it. We kind of like, some schools kind of tend to overvalue creativity, and then like, okay, well, were the students actually learning? That was a cool project, but like, did we master the objective, right? What was or I'll sit in and observe a class and I was like, so what was the point of this lesson? Right? We talked about this, we talked about that, but like, what was the objective, right? I didn't know, the students didn't know, we just kind of talked about random stuff. So it's like, yeah, so those are things I hope to challenge whatever school I'm at. It's like, yeah, are we being very clear about what we want and what we're expecting? Things like that. Is that, are we done? Great. Thank you, yeah. You're welcome.